So you just saw a few things touched upon, little details of cod biology that literally weren't known 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago. And I'm going to plug Ted Ames. The stuff, he didn't even talk about this stuff that came out of Fisheries, how many years ago, Ted? 10 years ago? About the serial depletion of spawning grounds in down East Maine, all along the Maine coast. And that was sort of a turning point in the cod biology. And since then, we've all been scrambling to try and understand the complexities. So you heard a little bit of it. Graham's look at the stock structure, Doug, this intense aggregation of fish into little balls all along the coast, formerly all along the coast, now what we term a remnant spawning population in Mass Bay, and it's sad we're turning it, calling it a remnant. So the question is, can we manage these species without considering these? And so I titled this, Can We or Should We Incorporate the Complexities of Cod Biology into Fisheries Management? It's not exactly like we're succeeding that well thus far for many species. And I would throw out, we're finding amazing things about the complexity of cod. Is this true about redfish, haddock, pollock, and every other species? It's probably true. The fishermen here understand it much better. There are times and places when you catch the fish. Those are probably spawning aggregations, and maybe they should be protected. I mean, no one wants to say that you got to chase it. I've been accused, some fishermen said, we said, God, let us know when you find spawning fish. They said, you follow us around, we find spawning fish, and then you close the area. I said, well, that's about right. So I say, should we? I think the evidence is we should manage this way. The question, and some of the stuff I'll throw out, is can we? Now, one of the most important people in fisheries management for cod is in this very room. Tom Meach, the executive director of the New England Fisheries Management Council.
Take a bow, Tom.
And we have drank many scotches over this very question. And he's a bit cynical about our ability to manage on the scale that we should. But we'll talk about that. And I'll give you a flavor of where we ought to manage, how we ought to manage cod, and probably every other species. But you realize quickly that we can never get there, probably. So these are the guys, sorry, these are gals, we're talking about. These are all taken from our little spawning ground right off Gloucester, and the video that Doug showed. The video doesn't do it justice. Those fish you saw tooling around in a big mass look like this. And there was a massive wreck fishery on it, just like it was on Whaleback, further north of the Isle of Shoals. Amazing fish, amazing fecundity. And the amazing part is, this was probably 2009, but this is when, after F for 20 years, fishing mortality was extremely high. How did these fish even get to this point in their life? How did they go through the gauntlet to come back inshore? Doug's work, which you didn't talk about, those DST tags, because they pick up a temperature and a tidal signal, and I'm on his graduate committee, so he says he's going to do this. You can actually plot where they went based on the tide signal and the temperature. So one of the mysteries we don't know is where these big cows hide away from the fleet. Now, we'll have to release those data one day. I see fishermen looking at me. So what I want to show you, this is Doug talked about this, again, using this array of receivers. Now this was early on. This is a little bit like Fleming discovering penicillin. We stumbled upon it accidentally, but it's pretty cool and pretty profound. So we set up, this is the spawning area. And this year we only had 4 receivers. It was, I think, the first year we did it. So you have to triangulate between them. A fish has to be picked up by 3 receivers. So when I show you the video, you'll see it drop out now and again. That's when it gets stormy. There's a lot of wave noise. The aggregation was actually a couple hundred meters. We watched it for 4 years. We put the array around it, and damned if the fish didn't move 300 meters after 4 years. So, you know, that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. So the array wasn't perfectly positioned to pick it up. But what happened was, I went to my boss and said, listen, we had a closure. I said, listen, these fish are staying into July. I said, we're opening on July 1st, but we need an emergency action to keep it going. And he said, okay. So we went through that machination, but somewhere along the line, the paperwork got messed up. It stayed July 1st. So midnight, July 1st, the fishery is open. We knew the spawners would still be there. So purely because of paperwork, and it was, by the time we found out, it was too late. So we sat back and said, well, we'll see what happens. So as Doug showed you, on the bottom, you can tell what time of day it is. Sunrise, sunset. You'll see there's 6 fish tagged in this array. You'll see them moving around. I'll run it through a couple times. So we start on June 28th. It's about 5 days compressed into a little under a minute. At midnight, July 1st, the fishery opens. So these are mostly females. They're milling around. You see at night they move a little bit more. And they drop out because of the wave action sometimes. So here's June 30th. 2,400 hours the fishery opens. Bang. We've superimposed the gill nets on there because we could see the fish running along the gill nets. And it happened so quickly, so we'll run it through. Interestingly, this particular group of fishermen, there was a number of guys, they left their nets in the water for a number of days. It was right around 4th of July, so no one was in a hurry. So we could see the nets, the fish actually being picked up out of the water because they actually have pressure sensors too. So we could see them stuck, run along the nets, we could see them stop when they're caught in the net, and then we could see them lifted out of the water. So one more time again, cue them on June 30th at midnight. So they're gathered in that big ball of fish all day long, and they go out and make some forays at night, find the males, do whatever they do out there in the mud, and bang. At midnight, all hell breaks loose. And the guys were there right at midnight, legally, put their nets in, and the fish reacted. So we wrote a paper on this, and some people have criticized it. It's sort of being talked about now. It was only 6 fish, but when the gill net fishery started on a spawning aggregation, 100% of our tagged fish, 50% were caught, 50% left the area. It never came back. We kept the receivers in. So the entire spawning aggregation was broken up by the gill net fishery. So, I mean, that's a piece. So our recommendation is we really shouldn't be fishing on spawning aggregation. Hook and line, we don't know. We want to do that work. Other people have shown trawl gear has broken up, the same sort of aggregation. So it's hard to fish benignly on a spawning aggregation. So this is looking at all the historic spawning grounds. A lot of this is from Ted's paper. You can see the different sources, things where we observed fish, where Ted documented, where old Big Lord Schroeder documented, Loretta O'Brien in a paper documented. So all up and down the inner coast. And this is basically what we're left with. Most of the down east stuff all gone. And even this area in Cape Cod Bay, we're just starting to study that. There's really not much of that left. So we're dealing with a remnant population. All of the production from Gulf of Maine is coming out of these. Well, I'm sorry. We don't know what's going on in Stellwagen. I think Graham's made a pretty good case. There's probably fish on caches, resident populations that are spawning amphibians and out there. We haven't identified them. Some are in closed areas, protected, others are not. So here's that same video. So what should we do to protect these spawning aggregations? They're dense, they're local, and usually they're inshore, so they're easy to get to. Anyone can fish on them. And the rec industry concentrated them also. This is just a commercial thing. I'll show you a picture. Strong site fidelity. Doug didn't show his data, but a lot of his dissertations, these things have fidelity. 80, 90% of the ones we tag come back to the exact same, within 10 meters of where we saw them the year before. So it's amazing. And the groups are genetically distinct. And one thing Doug touched on, but inshore, we currently assess them as Gulf of Maine fish, Georges Bank fish. Even inshore in Gulf of Maine, the winter spawners, which are December, January, and the spring spawners, May, June, are genetically distinct. So it's really two different species. They're relatively different production. Their larvae are in the water at different times, subject to different predation, different fishing pressure. We don't know how they mix it up in the fishing grounds. So should we be managing these separate, winter and spring spawners? That would be the right thing to do. Can we do it? Probably not. So this is some of the impetus to close these areas was this. This is the wreck fleet. And it was crazy. Boats jamming into each other, catching hundreds of fish. The bag limit was 10 fish at the time. We had boatloads, 6 people, 10 fish each, 60 fish, 40 pounds. The wreck industry bringing in thousands of pounds on a boat. It's unsustainable. You can't sit on an aggregation of this. So what we did is at this point we've created a number of closures. We have the winter closure, which is fairly large in Mass Bay. We have the spring CCZ, which Doug showed you where most of our work has been. Fairly small, and then we have the one up north, just south of Isla Shoals. Now that's in federal water, so that went through the council process with Tom leading that. Mass, we closed those. We put out a paper, it came out last year, and I said, you know, the use of small closures, you know what, a year later I'm saying, it's not enough. What we're seeing now, what we've discovered, is that little area we do in the spring, there's a bunch of spawning fish south of that. So it's really a mosaic of humps holding fish, and I think any fisherman in this room is going, duh, of course it is. And you know how we find these humps? We follow the fishermen. The reason we haven't found them is because they've been in the spring rolling closures, so no one's fishing in these for a while. And we did an experimental fishery and opened it in state waters, and lo and behold, the guys found aggregations of fish, so we closed it back up again. So this is a starting point of what we should be doing, is finding the aggregations and closing them. It doesn't mean you can't fish on these fish when they're somewhere else. We should, but you want to be fishing on a mix of spring and winters from different aggregations, all somewhere on the top of stowaway and feeding. So you distribute mortality across a whole bunch of different these small stocks. So in a bigger sense, here's where the spawning closures are. Here's a couple we know that are open, and we haven't been able to close them yet because it's a difficult process. And like I said, I think there's one, at least one on Stellwagen. I think there's probably some out at Caches. But there's one around Block Island, interestingly. And those are genetically the same as the winter spawners in the Gulf of Maine. Because what happens in the winter is larvae leak out down the backside of the cape and sort of homogenize the genetics for southern New England. These are treated as George's Bank fish. They're genetically really winter spawners from the inner Gulf of Maine. How we deal with that, I don't know. So the wreck fisheries on top of that every winter. And then we just started studying this group off Scituate, the yellow area. This is part of that historic band that Bigelow and Schroeder said was there. We just put out a bunch of receivers. We found fish, and it's in federal waters. But it is, we pushed forward a closure that's in the omnibus habitat amendment. Is that right, Tom? We're hoping that goes through. Again, and I hate, you know, when fishermen are struggling to catch cod, I'm standing here saying we need to close more areas. But I think to get these fish back, we have to lay down the spawners. And so we think we're really cool. We've gone forward with these closures. Well, here's one I dug out from the colonial laws of 1668. And no man shall henceforth kill any codfish, hake, haddock, or pollock to dry for sale in the month of December or January. Hell, 300 years ago they had a winter spawning closure. And these laws were all lost as when we turned to statehood. And these colonial laws went away. So we're back in the same spot. What are the other challenges? So we got these small areas we ought to close. We're moving towards it. We're doing pretty good. How do we manage a species that has winter and spring spawners? We don't know the productivity. We may be destroying the entire winter spawning stock because they're aggregated in a certain area where the fishery occurs in the spring. We don't know. And that's more stuff that's going on. We have evidence. Some of the biggest year classes that we see in cod are coming from spring spawning. So there's maybe a relative difference between winter and spring. So can we go to that in management? I'd love to hear from Tom when we start the discussion. Probably not. To do it, we need to assign the fish to stock, which means every fish that's brought in from a statistical area, we need to know the proportion that's from Georgia's, proportion that's from winter, spring. Can we do it? Yes. Can you do it in a practical way for the money that's available? No. So what do we do when we can't match management to the intricacies of the species? That's for the managers who sit around the New England Council to decide. But you hate the word, but precaution is really what we have to do. We cannot wring out every pound that we think we can. We face this kind of uncertainty. And so we go for MSY. MSY, interestingly, you go back to a paper by Larkin, the epitaph of MSY from the 70s, the death of using MSY, why we should never use it. And people think it's because the environment changes, so MSY changes. That has absolutely probably happened with cod. That wasn't his point. His point, he studied salmon. His point was because most populations of fish, when we understand what's going on, are going to be a bunch of small populations. And whatever is the lowest productivity is going to get wiped out. We saw it happen. All down East Gulf of Maine is gone because we treat them all as one big population. So I'll close and say we thought management was challenging. With the data that's coming out more and more, better and better, it's interesting and challenging. The management is even more challenging to get it right. So thank you.